Hello and welcome back. Today we look at the UK prisons that have been closed and those who were incarcerated there. We will look at the history and why they were closed, and then of course get into those inmates. And first we start down south. Kingston Prison in Portsmouth. Kingston Prison was originally built in 1877 and became a police station during World War II. In 1965, capital punishment was abolished in Britain, and as a result, Kingston began exclusively to hold inmates serving life sentences. It actually became the only prison in England and Wales to have a unit exclusively for elderly male prisoners serving life sentences. It was then redesignated as a more general Category B and C prison, the elderly prison unit moving to another prison. From April 2012, Kingston became mainly a Category C prison, but it did hold a high percentage of inmates serving life sentences. On the 10th of January 2013, it was announced that Kingston Prison would close in the next few months as part of a wider prison closure programme established by the Ministry of Justice. The prison closed on the 28th of March 2013 and it is currently converted into 267 homes. One of the notable inmates was Archibald Hall. His criminal career began at the age of 15 as a thief. He then progressed to housebreaking. He was convicted for trying to sell jewellery in London and got a sentence. After leaving jail, he studied antiques and took lessons to soften his Scottish accent. He returned to Scotland and began working as a butler to Lady Hudson. He would steal items from her. He then combined stealing items and racketeering while working as a butler to 82-year-old Walter Scott Elliott and his 60-year-old wife Dorothy. Scott Elliott had been the Labour MP from 1945 to 1950, was wealthy and had a high-up Scottish background. Hall's plan was to rob the couple of their money and retire, but this went wrong and he took the lives of both of them. Dorothy Scott Elliott walked in on Hall and Michael Kitto as they were discussing the plan. They then took the lives of the couple and drove them to two different locations where they buried them. Mary Coggle, who was the couple's housekeeper, actually helped the two men do this. She then started to wear the jewellery and clothes of the deceased, and this brought too much attention, so the two men also took her life. The next victim was actually Hall's half-brother, Donald. He had recently been released from prison because of crimes with children, and Hall hated him. They told him that their next robbery was going to be a tie-up job and tricked him into letting them practice on him. Once Donald was tied up, Hall took his life. They put Donald in a boot of a car and drove him up to Scotland. They replaced the car's number plate, which meant the tax disc and the number plate didn't match. It was very wintry weather and it made driving really dangerous, so on reaching up near Scotland, they decided to check in to a house hotel on the north side of a high street overnight to lessen their chances of being in an accident. However, they made shifty movements and that made staff suspicious. They were worried about whether the pair would pay for their stay, so they called the police. When the police arrived, they realised the tax disc and the number plate didn't match and took them both in for questioning. They then took the car to the police station, where they made the discovery of Donald in the boot. Kitto was arrested, but Hall escaped through a lavatory window. He was captured by the police a short while after. They linked the car to the address of Hall's in London, where they found lots of items. They then charged him with all 4 murders. Hall tried and failed to take his own life while in custody before revealing the whereabouts of all the victims. He was convicted at the courts in London and Edinburgh of all 4. He was ordered to lie on file and sentenced to life imprisonment. In Scotland, it was recommended that he serve a minimum of 15 years, and in England, the judge handed down a recommendation that he should never be released. He published an autobiography, A Perfect Gentleman, in 1999. He passed away from a stroke in Kingston Prison, Portsmouth in 2002 at the age of 78. He was one of the oldest of more than 70,000 prisoners in British prisons and the oldest to be serving a whole life tariff. The next person may be someone you recognise, Leslie Grantham. He was born on the 30th of April 1947. He's best known for his role as Dirty Den Watts in BBC's EastEnders. He joined the army as a teenager in the mid-1960s and he was posted to West Germany. He found himself in debt to army colleagues. He resorted to criminal activities in his attempt to clear his debt. On the 3rd of December 1966, he attempted to rob a taxi driver, Felix Reis. He threatened him at gunpoint and demanded money. In a struggle between the two men, Leslie Grantham shot Reis. He passed away. Grantham was arrested soon afterwards and charged with murder. In his statement to the police following his arrest, he said that he did not know the gun was loaded and it had gone off during the struggle, which would have resulted in a conviction for manslaughter had a jury believed this version of events. However, at the trial in April 1967, he was convicted of murder and sentenced to life imprisonment. Although this happened in Germany, he served his sentence in British prisons. He was paroled in 1977 and served just 10 years of his life sentence in Kingston Prison. Now we move on to Redbank Prison, which was built in 1844. On the 4th of September 2013, it was announced that Redbank Prison would close by the end of that year, and the prison closed in January 2014 under the Closure of Prisons Order. In January 2024, the property was sold for $7 million to a non-profit education foundation. Amelia Dyer was one of the inmates at Redbank Prison. She took the lives of infants in her care over a 30-year period during the Victorian era. She was a trained nurse and was widowed in 1869. She went on to do baby farming to earn money. She would adopt unwanted infants in exchange for money. She initially cared for the children, but a few passed away in her care, which led to a conviction of neglect and 6 months hard labour. She then began directly taking the lives of children she adopted. She was unstable her whole life and was committed to many asylums. Someone discovered a child in the River Thames, and the address led back to her. She was arrested on the 4th of April 1896. It was one of the most sensational trials of the Victorian period. She was found guilty of taking the life of Doris Marmon, and she had her life taken on the 10th of June 1896. It's believed that she took the lives of up to 400 children. Charles Wooldridge was also an inmate. He had a wife called Laura Glendale and was a soldier. In 1894, his regiment was posted to Windsor. His commanding officer had not given permission for the wedding to take place. Wooldridge's wife was off the strength and so was unable to join her husband when his regiment moved. This forced the couple to live apart, and this put a huge strain on their marriage. At first, the couple were really in love, despite the enforced separation. Laura was described as flirtatious and lively, where Charles was described as jealous and suspicious, which led to many arguments. By March 1896, she had started to use her maiden name again. When he visited her, he attacked his wife and he injured her nose. From then on, she avoided Wooldridge, refusing to see him. He heard rumours that she was having an affair with another soldier or an official at the General Post Office where she worked, and having received a document from her to sign stating that he would stay away from her. He arranged to meet Laura in Regent's Park Barracks on the 29th of March 1896, but when she failed to turn up, he travelled to her lodgings near Windsor. A violent argument started, which spilled out to the street outside. He then took her life. he gave himself up to police, who arrested him and took him to Windsor Police Station. He was sentenced to death, and on the morning of the execution he attended a service in the prison chapel and showed lots of remorse. This happened on the 7th of July 1896. It would also inspire the line by Oscar Wilde, "Yet each man kills the thing he loves." Now we move on to another closed prison, Gloucester Prison. Gloucester was opened in 1792. In April 2003, Gloucester Prison was named in a survey as among the 20 most overcrowded prisons in the UK. The following day, the prison was a scene of a 3.5-hour siege when 2 prisoners protested over visiting rights by barricading themselves in a cell. From April 2017 to October 2018, the former prison was open to the public under the Jailhouse Tours brand, whilst planning permission was finalised. The prison is now open to the public for numerous events. Stefan Kiszko was an inmate at Gloucester Prison. He was a 23-year-old tax clerk from Eastern Europe. He actually immigrated from Soviet Ukraine. He became the prime suspect in the murder of Leslie Anderson, when 4 girls, Maxine Buckley, Catherine Burke, Debbie Brown and Pamela Hind, together claimed that he had indecently exposed himself to them the day before Leslie's life was taken. The police quickly set their sights on him, even though he had no criminal record and his social life really didn't involve lots of friends. He was with his mother and aunt. A psychological evaluation showed that he had a mental and emotional age of just 12 years old and had an unusual hobby of writing down registration numbers of cars that annoyed him, which the police believed supported their suspicions. Investigators pursued evidence which might incriminate him and ignored other leads that may have taken them in any other direction. He was the only person in the police's sights. They searched his home and his car and found a bag of sweets and a girly magazine. They arrested him on the 21st of December 1975. During questioning, the detective seized upon every apparent inconsistency between his varying accounts of relevant days, which further demonstrated his likelihood of guilt. He confessed to the crime after 3 days of intensive questioning. He believed that by doing so he'd be allowed to go home, and that the investigations would prove him innocent after his confession was proved false. He requested to have his mother present while he was being questioned, and was refused, and crucially the police didn't caution him until long after they had decided he was the prime suspect, actually the only suspect. After admitting to the murder to the police, he was charged with taking the life of Leslie on Christmas Eve 1975. On the first morning of trial, it was clear that his defence team made major and consistent mistakes throughout the whole court proceedings. He remained adamant that he never had met Leslie before, and he didn't take her life. He said he was tending to his father's grave with his aunt at the time of the murder, before visiting a garden centre and then going home. When asked why he confessed, he said, "I started to tell these lies and they seemed to please them, and the pressure was off as far as I was concerned. I thought if I admitted what I did, the police would then check out what I had said, find it untrue, and would then let me go." He was found guilty on the 21st of July 1976 and was given a life sentence. While in prison, he was hated by most inmates, and he received multiple taunts and threats in the first months after his conviction. He was physically attacked on 4 occasions. His mum continued to profess her son's innocence, but was ignored by politicians, including Cyril Smith and Margaret Thatcher. In 1984, she contacted Justice, the UK human rights organisation which at the time investigated many miscarriages of justice. 3 years later, she was put in touch with solicitor Campbell Malone, who agreed to take a look at the case. In February 1991, the case was finally reopened. When looking through the case with the help of a private investigator, there was many errors. They said that his innocence was demonstrated through medical evidence. He had a medical condition which rendered him infertile, which contradicted forensic evidence obtained at the time of the crime. There was also someone who said they had seen him with his aunt tending his father's grave on the day and the time that the crime took place. The witness said they couldn't understand why they had not been called to give evidence at trial. Someone else also said that they had been in a shop around the same time as him and saw him at the garden centre. The 4 girls who gave evidence at the trial now said that their evidence was false and they had lied for a laugh because at the time it was funny. In May 1991, Kenneth Baker ordered his case to go to the Court of Appeal. On the 19th of December 1991, he was bailed to a hospital. On the 17th of February 1992, the investigation into his conviction began. It was heard by 3 judges. The forensic evidence was sent to labs to be tested again, and it proved that he was innocent. He had spent 16 years in prison and was released in March 1992. In 1993, unfortunately, he passed away on the 23rd of December from a severe heart attack at his home. He was supposed to have received $500,000 in compensation for the years he spent in prison, but neither he nor his mother ever received the full amount they were awarded. Herbert Armstrong was born on the 13th of May 1869 and was a solicitor. He is the only solicitor in the UK ever to receive capital punishment. He poisoned a solicitor who was in competition with him. He was also charged with taking the life of his wife. He received capital punishment on the 31st of May 1922. Now we move on to Blundeston Prison. It was opened in 1963 and was expanded 3 times before it closed. It first expanded in 1975 with the addition of 2 more cell wings, and then again in 2002 with the addition of a democratic therapeutic community wing. In 2008 it also had 60 cells added. In 1996, the prison came under intense criticism after 6 inmates escaped whilst being transferred to other jails. It closed in January 2014 under the Closure of Prisons order. The closure led to criticism from local politicians, including planning proposals to allow the site to be used for a large housing development. It was sold in January 2016 for $3 million to Badger Building. It was demolished in August 2017. Harry Roberts was one of the inmates here. He was involved in crime from a young age, helping his mother sell items of jewellery on the black market. He went in the army for some time, but when he came out, he went back to criminal activity. He had a partnership with his friend Jack Whitney and carried out dozens of armed robberies that targeted bookmakers, post offices and banks. He is quoted as saying, "The most I earned was $1,000 from a single job. Whitney was the eldest, the boss. He knew the best places to rob. John Duddy joined us later." Police attempted to arrest Roberts in Shepherd Bush. He fired a gun and shot at 41-year-old police constable Geoffrey Fox, Detective Sergeant Christopher Hudd, and 25-year-old temporary detective constable David Wombell in West London. He then got a tent and hid in Fawley Wood near Bishop Stortford until the winter set in and he moved inside farm buildings. He was familiar with the area as he grew up there as a child. A £1,000 reward was offered for information leading to his arrest. Roberts used his military training to evade capture for 96 days, but was finally caught by police while sleeping rough in a disused airfield hangar. He was convicted of all 3 murders and sentenced to life imprisonment with a minimum term of 30 years. While in prison, he made several attempts to escape, and in 2001, he was moved to an open prison, but this was cut short and he was returned to a closed prison within months after allegations that he was involved in drug dealing and smuggling. He was interviewed by an author, and she said that he showed no remorse for his victims. After many failed appeals in October 2014, the parole board approved his release on an unspecified later date. He was released on the 11th of November 2014 after serving 48 years in prison. He was 78 years old. Richard Reid is also another person who spent time in the prison. He was born to a father who had a huge criminal career, and he converted to Islam as a young man in prison after years as a petty criminal. He became radicalized and went to Pakistan and Afghanistan, where he trained and became a member of the Al-Qaeda. On December 22, 2001, he boarded an American Airlines Flight 63 between Paris and Miami, wearing shoes packed with explosives, which he unsuccessfully tried to detonate. Passengers subdued him on the plane which landed at Logan Airport in Boston. He was arrested and charged and indicted. In 2002, he pleaded guilty in a US federal court to 8 federal criminal counts of terrorism based on his attempt to destroy a commercial aircraft. He was sentenced to 3 life terms plus 110 years in prison without parole. He was transferred to a super maximum security prison in Colorado. We now move on to Canterbury Prison. It was first opened in 1808 and served as a Home Office archive during the First World War. It then spent time as a naval detention centre during the Second World War. The prison reopened in 1946 as a local prison to serve the courts of Kent. In 2002 it became a Category C training prison, and in 2006 a foreign nationals prison. In 2003, the prison was highlighted by the Prison Reform Trust as being one of the most overcrowded prisons in the UK. It was overpopulated by 57%. 2 years later, the Howard League for Penal Reform criticised the prison for its high rates of inmates taking their own lives. On the 10th of January 2013, the Ministry of Justice announced that it was one of the 6 prisons that would close. The prison closed on the 31st of March 2013 and was put up for sale in March 2014. Christchurch University bought the former prison site and is using it as a site for student accommodation for its North Holmes campus. One notable inmate is Michael Stone, whose criminal record dated all the way back to when he was the age of 12, and this continued into adulthood. He left the care system and developed an addiction to substances, which cost him $1,500 a week. He served 3 sentences in the 80s and 90s for robbery, burglary, grievous bodily harm, and assault occasioning actual bodily harm. He was known to carry weapons and squirted things in his victims' eyes using a lemon bottle. He became a big figure in the criminal underworld of Kent. Police suspect that he took the life of Francis Hugo, who was found in a park in Maidstone in 1976. He was 65 years old and from Guernsey and was a former policeman. The motive for the murder appeared to be robbery, since he always carried large amounts of cash, yet when he was found only had £3 on him. He accidentally took the life of his partner by injecting too much drugs, which caused an overdose. Police also questioned him about the death of a friend who fell under a London tube train as he stood next to Stone. Stone later boasted of pushing the man. He was also initially questioned regarding taking the life of 64-year-old Mary Town, but this was ruled out as another man was later convicted. On the 9th of July 1966, in a country lane in Kent, Lynn Russell, aged 45, and her 2 daughters, 6-year-old Megan and 9-year-old Josie, and their dog Lucy, were tied up and attacked while walking home from a swimming event. Lynn, Megan and their dog Lucy had their lives taken during the 15-minute attack, but Josie survived and made a recovery. The 3 had walked past a parked car on the lane before a man got out wielding a hammer and demanded money. Lynn said that they didn't have any and offered to go home and get some, but the man refused before tying them up and attacking them. Lynn urged Josie to run home and get help, but the attacker caught her, blindfolded her with strips of her swimming towel and tied her to a tree before attacking her. Lynn had also been blindfolded. After attacking the girls, the attacker then drove off hastily in his car. In the week after having their lives taken, Stone and another man were known to have carried out a robbery in Gillingham, near where it happened. In July 1997, the police arrested him for the crimes after a tip-off resulting from a reconstruction on the Crime Watch TV programme. A psychiatrist called to report his suspicions of Stone, and another 2 nursing staff called, also naming Michael Stone. These medical workers had worked with Stone before the crime. They reported that by the 4th of July, 5 days before the crime, Stone was becoming increasingly enraged and had aggressively threatened to take the lives of people and their families. When questioned, he had no alibi for the day of the crime, saying he couldn't remember where he was as he'd been taking too many substances, and because more than a year had passed. At the crime scene, a fingerprint was found on the lid of Josie's lunchbox, as well as a black bootlace that had a stain on it and was used in the attack. Michael Stone was known to use a bootlace to raise the veins in his arms. These were scientifically tested using the techniques available at that time, and no link was found to Stone. Stone pleaded not guilty at his original trial in 1998, but his conviction was based on a testimony from a witness, Damien Daly, who claimed that Stone had confessed to him while in prison during a conversation through a heating pipe at the back of their cells. 2 other prisoners also came forward and testified that he said he was involved in the crime. The court also heard that Stone was unable to present any of the clothes he was wearing at the time for analysis, as he said he had burnt them because he was too fat. On the 21st of December 2006, a judge decided that Stone should spend at least 25 years in prison before being considered for parole, meaning he is likely to remain in prison until at least 2023. The judge had said that imposing a whole life order was appropriate, but that 25 years was the longest tariff he was legally entitled to impose. In October, the CCRC announced that it was conducting a fresh review of Stone's case. It was going to perform new forensic testing on some of the evidence in the Russells case, using a technique that had not been discovered at the time of Stone's conviction. Stone remains with his innocence, saying that his conviction is a miscarriage of justice, on the grounds that the evidence against him came from another prisoner, who was described as a career criminal who would lie when it suited him. Stone's legal team actually argued that Levi Belfield could be responsible for the crime. However, Belfield's partner at the time, Joanna Collings, has insisted that she was with him on the day that the crime took place, as it was her birthday. In 2017, it was reported that Levi Belfield had actually confessed to taking their lives to a fellow prisoner. He then denied making any such confession. In February 2022, Stone's solicitor Paul Bacon stated that Belfield had admitted to the crime. It contains detail which Bacon suggested would only be known to the person who did it. Last year, Belfield's lawyer claimed that Levi Belfield had admitted to the crime during a conversation with a prison psychologist. Stone's lawyer declared that a signed confession by Belfield had been handed over to the CCRC. Belfield later retracted his confession and said that he sent the letter to Kent Police because he wanted the £5,000 cash payment. The CCRC are still conducting their new review of Stone's conviction and the case, but in May 2021 it came to light that Kent Police had relocated the lace found at the scene of the attacks, which had been lost, and that Stone's defence team had asked for it to be analysed for DNA traces, hoping it could lead to the overturning of his conviction. He remains in prison. 2 other inmates that served time here were the Kray twins, Ronnie Kray and Reggie Kray, and I'm sure we all know who they are. They were gangsters and were huge organised crime figures in London. They were identical twin brothers, and they were big in the crime world from the 1950s until they were arrested in 1968. Their gang was known as the Firm, and it was based in Bethnal Green. In their crime world, They committed armed robbery, arson, protection rackets, gambling, assaults, and taking the lives of other gangsters. By the 1960s, they were really well known across the UK. They were on television and they hung around with prominent members of London society. On the 8th of May 1968, they were arrested and they were convicted in 1969. The detective who led the case was Detective Leonard Nipper Reid. Each was sentenced to life imprisonment. Ronnie was classed as insane and was committed to Broadmoor Hospital in 1979, and he passed away on the 17th of March 1995. Reggie was released from prison in August 2000 and passed away 5 weeks later. Now we move on to Redbank Secure Unit. It was a local authority secure children's home, a juvenile detention facility, and it was located in Merseyside. It opened in 1965 when it was one of just 3 units and accepted both boys and girls. In 1990, it housed 26 boys and young men convicted of very serious crimes, including taking the life of a person and arson. While children were sent there, it taught them to learn self-control and discipline in an affectionate environment that is sensitive to their special needs. It later specialised in accommodating child S offenders. In 2009, it was one of the 9 secure children homes in England. It closed in 2015. It is now used as a school for children called Willow Bank. Mary Bell was someone who was sent to Redbank. She was 10 years old and took the lives of 2 children in her area in Newcastle in 1968. On the 25th of May 1968, the day before her 11th birthday, Bell took the life of 4-year-old Martin Brown in an upstairs bedroom of an abandoned house. On the 31st of July 1968, 3-year-old Brian Howell had his life taken by Mary Bell. He was last seen playing down the street with one of his siblings, the dog Mary Bell and Norma Bell. Norma Bell was Mary's friend, but they weren't related. Mary was taken in for questioning, like the other children last seen playing with him. Whilst being questioned, she said she remembered he had a small pair of scissors. This confirmed to the police that she was the person who took his life, as only the police knew about the broken scissors found at the crime scene. She then confessed to taking the lives of both boys. She was convicted of manslaughter in December 1968. She was 11 years old. Her actions were judged to have been committed under diminished responsibility. She's actually Britain's youngest female killer and was diagnosed with a personality disorder prior to her trial. Her friend, 13-year-old Norma Joyce, was acquitted of all charges. Bell was released in 1980 at the age of 23. Another person who served time at Redbank was Jon Venables. On the 12th of February 1993 in Merseyside, Robert Thompson and his friend Jon Venables, who were 10 years old, abducted and took the life of 2-year-old James Bolger. Thompson and Venables led James away from a shopping centre after his mum took her eyes off him for just a few seconds. He was found in Walton, Liverpool 2 days later. They were both charged on the 20th of February 1993 with the abduction and murder of James. They were found guilty on the 24th of November, making them the youngest convicted murderers in modern British history. They were sentenced to indefinite detention at Her Majesty's pleasure and remained in custody until a parole board decision in June 2001 recommended their release on a lifelong licence at age 18. Venables was sent to prison in 2010 for breaching the terms of his licence and was released again on parole in 2013, and in November 2017 was again sent to prison for possessing images on his computer. He remained in prison in 2023 after his appeals for parole were rejected. As of today, Jon Venables remains in prison and Robert Thompson remains free. And that concludes our video today. Obviously, this is of closed prisons, and I wanted just to share a stat. On the 6th of September 2024, it showed the total prison population to be 88,521. Usable operational capacity for the system stands at 89,619. In May 2024, it was calculated that 71 of the 122 prisons in England and Wales were holding more people than they could. The most overcrowded prison was Durham, which had 573, but was being asked to accommodate 973 inmates. Obviously, the government before tried to tackle this with a look at rehabilitation to stop offenders re-offending, as well as putting in 500 million to build new prisons. The current government have also been releasing prisoners to make more space, as ultimately, if the prisons are full, which they nearly are, if there's no space for a prisoner, they can't go to prison, and it just raises the level of violence and puts prison officers really at a huge risk. I find it interesting that all these prisons closed, but the crime rate still goes up. Obviously, you can argue, is it because we're more aware, more people are getting caught? The climate has changed. Obviously, people are struggling and have been since 2020 a lot more. But I guess it's a positive that a big budget is going in and they are going to try and acquire more land to build more prisons. I also think the look on rehabilitation is really important. Now, a lot of people recommit crimes because when they come out of prison they have no support, and I'm not talking about releasing the people I usually talk about in my videos, but there'll be people that commit petty crimes because they're in need and they just keep going back to prison because it's hard to get a job, housing. It's hard to live if you haven't got that support. So hopefully probation also gets an overhaul and looked into, but we will see. And as always, let me know your thoughts, and thanks so much for watching. Until next time.